High school, I was president of the camera club. That's me on the lower right. And I photographed a hula hoop contest in the first mall that was ever built in America. It was called Mondawmin Mall. And so as I grew older, my father would give me more and more complicated cameras. When I was in high school, I entered a contest, and I won an honorable mention. This is my cousin Sally, and Sally and I still travel a lot together. And I think that was one of the reasons that I decided that I wanted to be a photographer, even though this wasn't, I didn't win any money or anything. So now I'm going to fast forward. I went to college and I studied, I majored in art. And after college, I went into the Peace Corps, which was a program in the United States where you were sent to foreign countries. And I was sent to Thailand, and I became interested in the hill tribes in the northern part of Thailand. So you can see I've got, I'm holding a camera in this picture, and it was a Nikon camera. I've always been shooting with Nikons. This was my first 35mm camera. And I was interested in these tribes because the clothing that they wore was so elaborate. It was embroidered. And I've always had an interest in like the art of everyday life. So maybe this was the first series of pictures that I ever took about that topic. Coming home from the Peace Corps, I decided to buy a motorcycle, and I drove the motorcycle from Thailand to England, 16,000 miles. This is India. It's a little Honda. I drove it through Afghanistan and Iran. Here I'm meeting some Bedouin nomads in the desert of Afghanistan. And I decided to study anthropology, and I went to Oxford for a year, and I did a graduate diploma in anthropology because I had an idea that I wanted to combine photography and anthropology. When I came home, I applied for an internship at National Geographic. So the picture on the right, that was me at National Geographic on an archaeological excavation. And you can see I had two cameras. One would have had a telephoto lens on it, one would have had a wide-angle lens. And the thing that's hanging between the cameras is an exposure meter, which you don't really see anymore. But these cameras did not have built-in exposure, so you needed to like take a separate reading for all you photographers out there. It's gotten a lot easier. While I was at National Geographic, which is in Washington, D.C., their headquarters, this is one of the pictures I took, and I think it must be one of my first graffiti pictures. This was 1968, and it was a turbulent year. Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, and so his soul brother, soul sister, it was a sort of sign of the times. After I did the internship at National Geographic, I decided that I wanted to do a story for National Geographic, and I proposed a story about a tribe in the Philippines. And basically I took my own money and I went to the Philippines and I shot this story, and Geographic didn't publish it. And this was, at the time it was incredibly disappointing. So I got married. It was a photography career. Wasn't going to work out. So I married an anthropologist, and he went to Japan. We went to Japan for him to do his field work. I accompanied him to Japan. And in Japan, I shot a lot of pictures that are sort of similar to the kinds of things that I still shoot today. People, crafts, art in the street. This was an umbrella factory in Japan. You can see I'm still shooting two cameras, both cameras. I started doing stories for Japanese publications. From there. And I began to photograph tattooing in Japan. Now in Japan, this is totally underground, or it was. It's a little more above ground now. And so, and now today, as you probably know, there's an overlap with graffiti art and tattoo art. A lot of graffiti artists also do tattoos and vice versa. And I'm sure there are plenty of people in the audience here who have tattoos. I was able to take quite a few pictures and work my way into this. These are gangsters, a lot of them. And I tried to publish this story, and I was not able to publish it. So for all of you people that are trying to be photographers, you definitely need to get used to being rejected. When I came back, my husband, who's now my ex-husband, got a job in Rhode Island teaching anthropology, and I got a job with a little newspaper called the Narragansett Times. And so I worked for this little newspaper for about a year. And it was actually very good practice to get sent out on assignments and have to take pictures or whatever they told you to take pictures of. But I wanted to go to New York, and so I just did. And we commuted, my husband and I, for 5 years from Rhode Island to New York, which was about 4 hours commute. And I got a job with the New York Post. And you can see, and that's me in the middle of that picture. Those were the photographers for this. This was a daily newspaper in New York City, and I was the only woman at the time. I mean, now it's very common to have female photographers, but then, this is 1977, it was unusual. And one of the things that we had to do was to take pictures that they called weather pictures. And if it was sunny or rainy or snowy, we were supposed to take a feature photo that illustrated that. And so I began driving through this neighborhood on the Lower East Side, looking for those kinds of pictures. We also had to cover hard news. This was a nuclear leak in Pennsylvania. And we covered celebrities, Muhammad Ali and Sophia Loren and Salvador Dali. Those of course, in New York City, sooner or later, every celebrity. So these are all pictures that I took while I was working for the Post. And this is an example of a weather shot that I took. And just a pure feature photo. While on vacation from the Post, I went to Haiti. I don't know what it's called in Spanish. Haiti? Anyway, you know what it is? You know what country it is. I saw children there who were making their own toys. Like these little boys were making cars out of tin cans. This little boy was making absolutely beautiful kites to sell from little sticks and tissue paper. And I began to think about whether I could find similar photos back in New York, those weather photos that I was talking about. So I started, while I was still working for the Post, I started looking for examples of children, youths, that made their own toys or were doing something creative, especially if their parents weren't watching. So these kids had a clubhouse in an abandoned building, and they were doing like military drills with wooden guns that they made themselves. I especially admire the adventurous kids. So while I was pursuing that, the boy on the bottom right showed me his notebook and explained to me that he was practicing to write his name on a wall. And his name was E3, his nickname. And before that, I actually had no idea what the letters that I was seeing on walls were. It was not commonly known that these were nicknames. That's the same boy with the pigeon, so I had been photographing him with his pigeon coop, and then he showed me this little book. And then when I expressed interest, he said that he could introduce me to a king. And the king was Gandhi, as a lot of you have probably heard. And so I wound up interviewing Gandhi. I took a friend of mine with me because I was afraid that they were going to steal my cameras. And that's me in Gandhi's basement. You can see the tape recorder on the table. And that's Gandhi and his friends. And I interviewed him, and he was so articulate about what he was doing with graffiti that I became obsessed with it. I just needed to know more. And the way that I was able to meet Gandhi at first was that the day that I met him, in his black book, he had clipped this picture from the New York Post that had my credit line under it. And this CIA, he had put that throw up on the wall that I hadn't even noticed. This was part of my play series. I had taken this picture because the little girl was on a homemade swing. But then he had clipped that picture out and pasted it in his black book. And so when I first met him, he knew what my name. He said, "Oh, Martha Cooper," and there in his black book was a photograph with my credit line. So I wound up, this is Gandhi in his room, and I like this picture because, for one, all of his friends could spend an entire day hanging out in his room, just drawing in their black books. But also, Gandhi is holding a photo album of his own photos that he took with a disposable cardboard camera. And people are always asking me, well, how did I connect with this scene? Well, one of the ways I connected, or the most important way, was that his photography has always been important in the graffiti world because it's a way of preserving the piece. Generally, it's a very ephemeral art form. The pieces, they might not even last a day. They can get crossed out, or transit could buff them. And this, of course, happens even more today. Gandhi told me that sometimes he wouldn't even do a piece on a train unless he had a camera to record it. But his camera wasn't very good, so I, of course, had a better camera, and I could give him the pictures, and I always tried to get the photos of pieces back to the artist. This is an example of black book. So finally, I think I'd been looking into graffiti for about a year, and I finally said to Gandhi, well, I really want to go to the yards because I really want to see how you get a big piece on a train overnight. It was hard to understand without seeing. So I did go to the yards, and this is the piece. I'm sure many of you have seen this picture before. And you can see, I'm going back, he's holding a book with a sketch that he had done before, and the character of Gandhi was from a Bondo Day underground comic book. You can see, if you look at the bottom of the D, you can see a little MC. That was for me, he put me up. I began to go to the Bronx regularly to try to capture photos of the best pieces as they ran above ground. This is what the South Bronx looked like. The buildings were totally bombed out. It was dangerous. It was full of drugs. I had a car, so I would drive around and park it by a train line. Sometimes I would stand on top of my car and just wait for trains to go by. And if you look at these pictures, you might think that they went by frequently, but in fact, you could wait for 5 or 6 hours and never get any pictures. Eventually, the artists, the writers, started calling me and telling me when they had done a new piece, and this was the 2-line, and the 2-line never turned around. So they could tell me whether it was what we called the morning side or the afternoon side. The morning side would have been, the light would be hitting it in the morning, and the afternoon side, the light would be hitting it in the afternoon because the trains ran north and south. And of course, I wanted to take the picture in the best light. This was one of my favorite pictures. I actually did not know that this train had been painted. It's Duster and Lizzie. Duster and Lizzie were a couple, and it's in straight letters and wild style. And the two cars had consecutive numbers on them, which meant that transit was not going to pull those cars apart. So as long as those two pieces ran, those two cars were going together. This is a piece by Futura. It's a very famous piece because it's a breaking, he calls it his break piece, and he was breaking away from the tradition of writing letters for your name. This is pretty much an abstract piece, and you can see part of a Zephyr piece on the right. So I don't think I knew this piece was coming either, and I feel like I was very lucky to get this picture. So I was still working for the New York Post, and one day I got assigned to shoot what was supposed to be a riot in the northernmost part of Manhattan. And when I went there into the police station, they had arrested a lot of little boys. And I wasn't supposed to take a picture, so I just snuck this picture. It's the best picture I have. You can kind of see how young these little kids were. But the cops explained to me that they had been fighting over shirts because they were having a dance contest and spinning on their heads. And so that sounded so interesting. This is what they had confiscated from the kids. But when I saw the markers in the spray can, I knew that it was somehow related to graffiti. So they kept the kids that had had the guns and the knives, but they let the littler ones go. And I asked them to please show me what they had been doing. And you can see we're outside the police station here. This is a police station inside the subway. You can see the cop is in the door watching. So they demonstrated this dance that they actually called it rocking. They did not call it breaking. And see, they had shirts with letters on them, and that's what they had been fighting for, because they had been arguing about, apparently, if you won the dance contest, you were supposed to get the other guy's shirt. So I contacted a dance expert, a writer, and we tried to find more about this, whatever it was. And I asked Henry Chalfant, who I know a lot of you have heard talk, and he managed to find Crazy Legs. So this is a picture on a playground that was actually quite near to where I lived on the Upper West Side. It's now called Rocksteady Park, if you've ever been to New York. And this is the Rocksteady crew, an early picture of them. That's Crazy Legs and Ken Swift and Little Crazy Legs. And I began to document breaking, and Henry was putting together a show, and so he was interested in getting these dancers to come and perform in his show. And that's, for those of you who know Henry, that's Henry on the left there. This was in his studio downtown, and P-Kid painted the backdrop, and that's Ram LZ on the right, and Fab Five Freddy, pretty much a lot of the names that had become legends in the early hip-hop. So Henry was putting this show together, but realized that in order for anybody to watch b-boying or breaking, we actually bought the kids these shirts, and we divided them into two crews, and gave them blue shirts and red shirts, and they divided, instead of doing it in a circle, since they were going to be performing, we had them do it in two rows. That's Ken Swift with the P-Kid backdrop. And that's Fab Five Freddy with a early turntable. And this was what Henry called his show. It's kind of a funny name, Aspects of Performance. He called it Graffiti Rock. And you can see it was May 1981. The words hip-hop were not in use at the time. So all of this documentation was before anybody was calling anything hip-hop. However, in this performance that Henry put together, he had DJing, MCing, b-boying, and graffiti, that's pretty much what people consider hip-hop now and then. Admission $1.50, pretty cheap. And the only problem was that unfortunately a rival crew showed, so we did with a dance writer I've been working with, we did an article in the Village Voice about this upcoming performance. However, on the actual day of the performance, the rival crew, the Ballbusters, showed up, and a fight ensued. Unfortunately, I had gone to lunch, so I didn't see this fight. I don't have any pictures of the fight, but the performance was canceled. So that performance never happened. But Tony Silver had read about this upcoming performance in the Village Voice. He had read this article in the Village Voice. Tony Silver was the filmmaker who made Style Wars. And he contacted Henry and he said, I'd really like to make a movie about this. So even though the performance didn't happen, a very important connection was made. So Tony and Henry got together. Henry had never made any movies at the time, although now he's made some really good ones. And they began working on Star Wars, which, as you know, is a classic. Because of the article in the Village Voice, even though the performance didn't happen, a lot of the TV crews in New York wanted to film this new dance craze. So, and Lincoln Center, which is a major cultural center in the middle of Manhattan, got in touch with Henry and asked him to please put on a performance at Lincoln Center. So a lot of things happened as a result of the Village Voice article in 1981, even though the original performance didn't happen. That's Frosty Freeze, rest in peace, at Lincoln Center. Through some of the same kids, I met Charlie Ahern, who was making another film called Wild Style. And Charlie asked me to come down in Riverside Park, right below where I still live, to take pictures of this wall that he was painting, to do some publicity stills. So this was a very informal photo shoot, but I'm sure that anybody who's interested in it has come across at least one of these pictures at some point. And finally, I have this in here because this is the first example. So you can see that we also have graffiti, b-boy, DJ, MC, all of the elements of hip-hop. But it wasn't until 1981, I think that's what this is, no, 82. This is the first example, and I've looked through everything I can find, where the words hip-hop appear in print in an interview with Africa Bambaataa. So a lot of things were going on, and people were documenting various parts of them, but it hadn't really coalesced into what we now think of as hip-hop. So when people ask me, well, why did you start photographing hip-hop? I really wasn't photographing hip-hop. I was just photographing things that I thought were interesting, and they happened to turn into hip-hop. So I continued to photograph, doing some magazine articles. This was for a children's magazine for National Geographic. I'm showing you this picture because it's one of the ones that the 13 pictures that, I don't know if any of you have seen them, out in the park. This is one of the ones that I chose. This is also in my neighborhood. This is around 96th Street if you've been to New York, and Broadway. Not everything was happening in the Bronx. This is what began to happen was that club promoters began bringing various acts downtown in the clubs, and that's Keith. You can see Keith Haring in the picture. That's Doe's performing, and this is just a small club called the Grill. The Kitchen. 1982, that's Keith Haring in the blue shirt watching this, and it's a catalog that he signed for me with a little B-boy on it. So I actually think that people like Keith Haring made it very hip to go to these clubs, because Keith Haring was already a well-known artist, or better known than any graffiti artist at the time. and people wanted to go to the clubs that he went to. So by he supported graffiti and b-boying, etc. He kind of just made it hip and trendy to go there. Again, that's Ronald on the right. So this is a television program called Graffiti Rock. It never really went anywhere, but that's Run DMC. Again, we have graffiti, b-boy, MCing, DJing, all of the elements were in this show. I shot the stills for Beat Street. There were so few people interested in taking these kinds of pictures that I was able to get a lot of jobs because I was a professional photographer, shooting like stills for Beat Street, stills for Graffiti Rock, and I still have these pictures. I feel lucky that I was able to take them. Finally, in 1984, Henry and I met, and we were independently taking pictures of graffiti. And Henry had a show at a gallery downtown, and one of the graffiti writers told me that Henry was going to have a show. And I met him there, and we decided to try to publish a book about graffiti. And I think we were rejected by about 25 different American publishers. I still have all the records. Very depressing. We made a huge portfolio with all the pictures and the text, and finally we decided to take it to the Frankfurt Book Fair in Germany, and we were able to sell the idea to Thames and Hudson in England, and this is what they published, Subway Art. It was only 96 pages. It's quite a small paperback book, and because it was an English publisher, the American edition was considered a foreign edition, so that we didn't really make any money off of this book, even though it sold 500,000 copies. But we didn't have any provision in the contract that if it sold more than 5,000 copies, we would get more money. It was not a good contract. Nobody expected this book to do well at all, so we didn't make any effort to hire a lawyer or something to get us a better contract.